Okay, quick math question. ADHD affects 10% of people, autism 2%, dyslexia 15%, high sensitivity 20%. So who exactly are we diverging from? Because I'm starting to think we might already be the majority, which would mean neurotypical isn't a biological norm at all. It's just neuroprivilege. I'm Claire and I've been working in learning and development for over 20 years. I'm neurodivergent and I think we've gotten the entire framework backwards. Let me show you why. Picture someone who genuinely thrives in these conditions. Sitting completely still for 8 hours, under fluorescent lights, doing repetitive linear tasks, following orders without questioning, suppressing emotions and physical needs, and minimal variety or stimulation. Now be honest, how many people do you actually know who naturally thrive like that? I'm guessing it's not many, right? And yet we have built our entire society around that. And we did that because factories needed it, schools needed it, offices needed it. The Industrial Revolution needed compliant, seated workers who could do the same task over and over. So we built systems for that brain. And anyone whose brain worked differently, well, we labelled them divergent. But here's my question. What if that ideal brain was never actually the majority? What if we just built the world for a minority cognitive system and then convinced everyone else there was something wrong with them? Because look at the actual numbers. ADHD between 5 and 10% of people, but we know it's massively underdiagnosed, especially in women and girls. So let's say 10%. Autism, officially, stats say between 1 and 2%, but again, we're only just starting to recognise masking, late diagnosis, and how many people slip through assessment. So it could be 3 to 4%. Dyslexia, 10 to 15% of people. Dyspraxia, around 5 to 6% of people. Highly sensitive people, 15 to 20%. And yes, high sensitivity is a neurological difference, not just a personality trait. Then you've got dyscalculia, hyperlexia, synesthesia, aphantasia, sensory processing differences. And here's the thing, there's massive overlap. So someone can be ADHD and autistic and dyslexic. So we're not just adding these numbers up, but even if we were being conservative, we're easily at 30 to 40% of the population having at least one neurodivergent trait. Now, add in all the people who've never been assessed, all the people who are struggling but don't have a diagnosis, all the people who are just barely coping by masking and forcing themselves through. What percentage are we actually at? What if it is most people? What if the actual neurotypical population, people whose brains genuinely, naturally fit the industrial system, is like 20 to 30%. Suddenly, neurodivergent doesn't mean divergent at all. It just means not part of the cognitive minority that the system happened to favour. So let's reframe this. What is neurotypical anyway? Is it a biological norm? Or is it just whoever happened to fit the system we built? Because if you think about it, the neurotypical brain is actually very specific. High tolerance for boring, repetitive tasks, can ignore physical and sensory needs, is comfortable with rigid hierarchies and rules that don't necessarily make sense, doesn't need movement to think, processes information in neat, linear, sequential ways, low emotional expression, doesn't get understimulated or overstimulated easily. Well, that's actually quite specific. That's not a default, that's a type. But we call it normal because the system needed it. The factories needed it, the schools needed it, the offices needed it. So anyone who needed movement to think or variety in stimulation, or to understand why before complying, or to process information visually, or to experience emotions intensely, got labelled as difficult, disruptive, divergent, disordered. Not because there's actually something wrong with them, but because the system wasn't built for how their brain works. Can you see what I'm saying? Neurotypical isn't a biological norm, it's neuroprivileged, privileged by historical accident. Now, if this is true, and I really think it is, the implications are massive. One, we've been pathologizing normal human variation. We've been telling millions of people, you have a deficit, you have a disorder, there's something wrong with you, when actually they're just incompatible with a system that was never designed for them. Two, the mental health crisis makes so much more sense. If most people's brains don't actually fit the environments we force them into, of course we have an anxiety epidemic. Of course we have depression and burnout everywhere. Because your nervous system knows when something's wrong. Anxiety isn't always a disorder. Sometimes it's a completely rational response to being in the wrong environment. 3, we've been trying to fix the wrong thing. We keep trying to help people manage their ADHD or cope with their sensitivity or overcome their autism. But what if the thing that needs fixing is the system? 4, universal design isn't just nice to have, it's essential. If we're right, then flexible working, movement-friendly spaces, multiple learning pathways, sensory accommodations, well, these aren't special adaptations for a minority, they're what most people actually need. And honestly, even if I'm wrong, even if neurotypical people are the majority, wouldn't it still be better to build systems that work for more brains, not fewer? Look, I know this is a big idea, and I'm not saying everyone has ADHD or everyone is autistic or that diagnostic criteria don't matter. What I am saying is maybe the framework itself is backwards. Maybe we need to stop asking, how do we fix neurodivergent people to fit the system? And start asking, why did we build systems that only work for a minority of brains? So in this series, we're going to explore all of this. How we created the myth of the normal brain, what this means for anxiety, depression, and mental health, how this frames personality disorders, what universal neurodesign could actually look like, and most importantly, what we can do about all of this. Because if we're right about this, everything changes. The way we design schools, the way we structure work, the way we think about success, the way we treat ourselves. So if you have ever felt like there's something wrong with you because you don't fit normal, what if you're not broken? What if you're just incompatible with a system that was never designed for how most human brains actually work? Sit with that and then come back for the next episode, because we're just getting started.